All right. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited for today's conversation. I'm here with my friend Ben Wikler, who is a longtime organizer and operative. You probably know him as the former chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. He is also the author of this new book, This is the Plan: How to End America's Meltdown and Save Democracy. Ben and I have known each other for a long time. I feel like politically we've been parallel, right? We came up in the same progressive netroots era. And crucially, we both have a deep experience in Wisconsin politics. You as a Wisconsin native who obviously has worked many races as party chair and a volunteer. I worked 3 years in Wisconsin because I was Russ Feingold's internet director, and then helped organize people online for labor during Scott Walker's Scott Walker's union busting bill, Act 10. And I'm so excited to talk today. We will probably, readers know I have to write about Wisconsin politics at least once a quarter. So apologies. We'll talk a lot about Wisconsin politics. There will be references to cheese curds. There will probably be references to old fashions. So hopefully, if you have not tried cheese curds, you should. They're the best food in the world. Ben, I want to start by asking you, though, just tell us about the book. This is the Plan, what it is, why you wrote it, and why folks should read it.
So thank you, Melissa. It is great to be with you. For all of those who have experienced Wisconsin, you know the majesty and joy of the world's greatest state. For the rest of you, I hope this conversation and then the book gives you a sense of why so many people love the state that I love so dearly, but also why in this moment, I think there's something to be learned from the experience of Wisconsin. Because the argument of the book, and I think I laid this out in a way that um, can spread this gospel, is that what the country is experiencing now, the nightmare we're experiencing right now, we had a mini version of that in Wisconsin first. We were a state that was, a swing state, very, very closely, evenly divided, like the country. And then the right won. Scott Walker won. Citizens United, the Tea Party swept in, and then they set about smashing democracy so that they would never lose again, even if the public didn't like it. They smashed unions, they defunded schools, they suppressed votes, they rigged our legislative maps, with critical strategy that Trump has now adopted on a national basis. And the whole idea for all of this was to make it so that even though they were defunding public services to reward the wealthiest people, that the public would not have any recourse to be able to change who was in charge and to change what those people did. Wisconsin's state Supreme Court was more far right than the U.S. Supreme Court. The Republicans' legislative majorities were bigger. The maps were more rigged. It was harder to vote in Wisconsin. We're one of the hardest states to vote, even though in 2024, thanks to the work of thousands and thousands of people, we had the highest turnout in the nation. They passed one of the most restrictive voter laws in the United States of America. It was this huge push by the right to essentially, the pendulum swings in American politics. They tried to stop the pendulum and make it so that no matter what people wanted, they would still be in control. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is trying to do to the country. We have, $1 trillion in healthcare cuts to pay for $1 trillion in tax cuts for rich people. And Trump's solution, as people freak out about life becoming totally unaffordable and hundreds of thousands of people losing their health insurance in my state and state after state across the country because the prices skyrocketed, Trump's solution is not to address the economic calamity that people are feeling in their gut, in their pocketbook, in their lives. It is to try to rig the electoral system so that the public can't throw out his henchmen. And my uh, my goal with the book was to show how we fought our way out of that in my state and to map out how every one of us can fight our way out of this on a national basis. That in a nutshell is the plan.
Great. Well, I want to ask about the subtitle specifically, because you talk about saving democracy. This is a tension I think comes up so much with my readers and in spaces that I operate in. I think the sense is, well, maybe American democracy is dead and gone. So should we be trying to save or should we be trying to rebuild and do better? And I want your thoughts on that tension.
I'm absolutely on team number two. I argue in the book, I map out a step-by-step plan to build a better democracy than we've ever had in this country. And, I write about in the book that at the country's founding, 6% of Americans had the right to vote. It is not like we want to restore some earlier golden era that never existed. And in fact, so much of how leaders are chosen in this country was intentionally set up to not reflect the will of the general public. At the same time, the founding documents, the Federalist Papers, they contain this extraordinary kind of poetry about the idea of majority rule and how that is the only legitimate basis for government. And the title of republic, James Madison writes, can only be given to a government that derives its power from the great body of the people, from the majority. Within the extremely circumscribed democracy that the founders set up at the beginning of the country, they were very clear that among those who voted, majority rule had to be the principle. That's why there was no filibuster when the country was set up. It had to be majority rule in the U.S. Senate. Otherwise, that would be a form of tyranny. And the story of the country is this kind of like unfolding this like very jerky circular passage to try to actually ensure that we would have government by, of, and for the people against lots and lots of people who over and over have tried to shrink the circle of the people who have power. It has not been a straight line. It has been, the moral arc of the universe has been successfully bent bit by bit towards justice, but it's actually, if you zoom in, very much a zigzag. This is a a moral arc that has gone in terrible directions and then good directions. Right now, we're in one of the bad direction moments. But what I show in the book, and I work through the sequence of things that we have to do to get there. We can end this ridiculous system where only some states have a meaningful role in choosing our presidents. We could have a one person, one vote democracy to choose the president. We could have a Senate that is ruled by majority rule, and where every American, including folks in DC and Puerto Rico, get to vote and get senators, and the Senate is not systematically biased towards one side or the other. We can get through this moment of the arms race gerrymandering to a world where we have a ban on partisan gerrymandering nationwide and even have proportional representation in the U.S. House, so that that everybody can have somebody who represents them, even if you're not in the party that won 51% of the vote in your particular district. All of those things are totally possible in the next few years. The other side of the coin is, as I argue, if we don't make these changes, if we don't win at the state level first, protect our democracy, win a federal trifecta, pass structural democracy reform in 2029, then we could be right back where we started. We could go back to 2010 in 2030. The backlash that always comes, um, you know, in a bad year for Democrats, Republicans take control, but then they make every future year bad by rewriting the rules to lock in their control. So we basically have one chance to defuse the bomb in 2029. And one last thing that this requires, I believe to my core, and I think it's worth reading the book if you don't yet agree with this, that will require reforming the U.S. Supreme Court, because the U.S. Supreme Court is actually kind of the heart of the rot. Not just Citizens United and the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, but constant attacks on unions, constant attacks on anything a Democratic president tries to do, with total support for the imperial presidency of Republicans. It is a one-way ratchet to the right that has lost its legitimacy and has been hopelessly corrupted by a handful of right-wing billionaires. And I think we got to reform the U.S. Supreme Court. And if we do all those things, then the future could actually be much brighter than it's been before. I think the the disaster of Trumpism, in part, is the result of a system that has been rotted out or successfully corrupted by a long-term movement on the right that you have documented and exposed and fought against in many different contexts. But this can't be the idea of we're going to put everything back to the way it was in 1996 and then we'll be golden. No, this has to be about actually building toward the future that everyone deserves to live in and that we actually want.
Can you speak a bit to the frustration? I hear so many people say, I'm so sick of hearing vote harder. And the truth is, after Trump was elected, we won election after election after election, but we didn't win quite by the numbers. And we'll get a little more into the specifics of Wisconsin in a minute. But I think there's a real, all hope is lost moment that you're able to get your way out of. I think there's one point where you're talking about like 2 out of the 3 things that could have happened didn't go your way, and you're still able to manage. So how can you, what would you say to someone who's like, please stop telling me to just vote harder because I've done that?
So, chapter 1 of the book is called Unleash Your Superpower. And I start by saying your superpower is not, it's not just your vote. It is not just your vote. Don't think that that's what I'm saying here. The superpower that all of us have, it's in the First Amendment to the Constitution. It is not even your freedom of speech, although that's really important too. The thing that all of us can do, whether or not you feel comfortable leading and hosting a Facebook Live like Melissa Ryan, the thing that all of us can do is we can organize. And organize just means getting building relationships with people so that you can have more than one person taking action. And what I map out is basically the work of persuading other people to kind of join you in a cause. You can join a group that exists already and help to grow it. You can start a group of your own. You can get that group of people together then to reach out to people that they know or have relationships with or have a link to, um, who are on the fence about whether to vote or who to vote for in places where elections are incredibly close, that you can actually affect. So that's what my Venn diagram is. Who can you affect? Whose vote really matters, who's actually on the fence. Those are the three things. And if you don't have anyone like that in your life, then you can support groups and organizations and people that are doing that, who do have those relationships. If you do that, not just in presidential races, but especially in the elections that are on a knife's edge, but no one's paying attention to them, then that can have an enormous ripple effect through the whole political system. And that is the game that the right has been playing for years, including in Wisconsin. The right targeted our state Supreme Court elections, poured huge amounts of money and time, and took over the court to the point where nobody even wanted to challenge the right wing justices in 2017 because it was so clear the right had a hammerlock on the state Supreme Court in my state. The only reason Republicans have a majority on the U.S. House right now is because of a state Supreme Court election in North Carolina in 2020, where the Republican won by 401 votes, and then over years was able to drive the hardcore gerrymandering of that state and add three extra Republican House seats, which is enough to add up to the Republican House majority nationally. So this is not vote harder. It's not even just like vote more often in more elections. This is organize a movement that recognizes how you actually build political power in this country, zero in on those fights, and do the things that actually make the biggest difference. Now, between elections, I also say you should advocate for better policy, and you should work to make a difference. And sometimes you know, when things get really dark, all that organizing you've done for political power will turn into the kind of community networks that allowed the people of Minnesota to repel ICE when they were in their streets. That is, blowing whistles and escorting kids to school and doing mutual aid work that is on the ground and in person. All that stuff, totally critically important. But if you don't contest for political power, you will lose. You have to be in the fight for the positions that actually write the rules for how this country works. And this book is about trying to map out basically the Death Star and where the ventilator shaft is and how we can fly our X-Wing fighters in. Information takes more than just Luke Skywalker. It's going to take a whole bunch of us to fly in and prevent the Death Star from destroying the planet.
Well, I really appreciate the mention of Minnesota and local activism, because I think so often folks on the left are waiting for this moment where 3.5% of the US population just magically shows up and then there's change. And one of the things that I'm always trying to emphasize is like, no, it's actually the way to fight fascism. Like, it starts at your library, it starts with your municipal races, it starts with school boards, something you cover extensively in the book. And I'd like to ask you about not just local activism, but also specifically local elections, which you really dig into, and maybe help folks understand how their, coroner, to use an example from your book, can help fight fascism, or how their school board members can help fight fascism.
So I do talk about a coroner election in which one of the candidates ran on an anti-zombification platform, and he was running as a Republican, but I found it so
The
hilarious.
most Madison story ever, by the way.
It's true. This is the one case in the book where I describe having endorsed a Republican in an election. I'm bipartisan. I don't believe in there's more than one solution to the zombification problem. But the argument about local office is that is virtuous to pay attention to your local office. It's actually that decisions that wind up determining the most powerful positions in the world are often made by local officials. Where to put polling places, how long the early vote period should be open. In Wisconsin, we have 1,850 municipal clerks who actually administer elections in our state. And these are generally totally nonpartisan public servants, but the right has targeted these positions to try to get conspiracy theorists and election deniers into positions of local control. So at one level, directly, in the United States of America, elections are run at the state level and administered at the local level, and local offices will determine whether democracy in fact survives or whether there's a path to make it actually work for everybody. That is why MAGA and the right have this precinct strategy, precinct by precinct, community by community, targeting the positions that hold the levers of power over who counts the ballots. do not cede that ground. We should be on offense. And I tell a story about Pamela Gantz, who defeated a fake elector in a race for De Pere City Council. And as I write in the book, she did that not by targeting the fake elector for having been part of a plot to steal, the presidential election. She won by talking about the highway interchange in De Pere, Wisconsin, that people were concerned about. I say, if you want to save democracy, talk about roads. Go to concrete things in people's actual lives that matter directly to them. But that goes to the second reason why local offices are so critical. Most of the things that shape the quality of life in any particular community are determined by local government. And the biggest issue right now across the country, if you poll people or just knock on doors and talk to people or talk to candidates who are doing that, it is the cost of finding a place to live. The cost of housing is so tough in so many different places, and it's
Yeah.
how that manifests is different in different places. But the decisions about how much housing to build, those are local government decisions. These are things that are made by city councils across the country. And so if we want to build more housing and make it more possible for people to start a family and raise their kids in the community that they grew up in, you've got to have people who are in the pro everyone being able to afford a roof over their heads camp who win local office. The consequences of that not happening is the electoral college power is moving to the south, to Texas and Florida, states that are run like autocracies, but where there's a lot of construction going on. And that means that it'll be harder to elect Democratic and democracy presidents. It'll mean that the right has a better path through gerrymandered districts to winning House majorities over and over and over. Now, those are things that we need structural national fixes to for as well. But really, this kind of sea change in where people live and then where power lives is happening because of a bazillion decisions made by local elected officials. You change that by getting involved in your community. And that leads, in my very long answer, to the third reason why it's important to work on local elections. It builds civic muscle. Doing that work, getting a group of friends together and getting involved and, electing someone who agrees to build a dog park near you, whatever the local fight might be, that is exactly how you meet the neighbors who you're going to enlist to help vote in the most consequential elections when everybody's watching, to help flip House and Senate majorities and defeat the next autocrat who wants to control the White House. So this, I write that politics not just not a spectator sport, it is a life sport. It has to be like pickleball, something that you can play, have fun, and do on a long term basis at any age. And for that to happen, that means there just aren't enough presidential elections to be a life sport in the way that politics has got to be. So build power, win locally, change the policies in your community, and get good at doing this work so that you're ready for the final boss.
Yeah, democracy is a muscle. All right. Well, I joked to you before that I thought this book was going to give me Wisconsin PTSD, but instead it gave me hope. Scott Walker did not invent, I want to make clear, he did not invent authoritarianism in America. I think that is the Jim Crow South. But when we think about the modern example, there was a lot of talk of Wisconsin being the laboratory of which other red states sought to emulate in various ways, and which I think, you can't talk about Project 2025 without talking about what happened in Wisconsin in 2011. It's changed my view on organizing probably for the rest of my life, more than anything else I've ever done. Can you talk specifically, because I think this is something people nationally don't understand, about the redistricting bill, how they did it, and the fight that y'all had to engage in both with redistricting and the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. So yeah, I say in the book, Project 2025 is reheated Project 2011. But then I dig in and I talk about, right to work, the phrase right to work, the attacks on unions that smash unions. Scott Walker started with public sector unions with Act 10, then went on to the private sector unions with the right to work law. That was a product of the segregated South. And specifically, they attacked workers' rights by talking about the threat of integrated unions where black and white workers would find common cause. The racial domination is over and over and over a way to create a wedge that allows domination of all poor and working class people across race. And this is, that Scott Walker's had the exact same strategy in my state, and it's the same strategy that Trump uses and that the right uses over and over. The con is you divide people in order to crush them all. It's divide and conquer. So in Wisconsin, Wisconsin was one of the states that enjoyed the experience of being red mapped. Red map was this national Republican effort. Karl Rove poured a ton of money and effort into it. It was to grab state legislative majorities and then kind of laser etch uh, control for the long term by gerrymandering for maximum Republican advantage. We had a multi-part plan to try to dismantle that. And I say we, referring to the work of tons of people who were in the trenches on this far before me, the Fair Maps Coalition in our state, candidates at all levels, grassroots organizers. There was a federal lawsuit. U.S. Supreme Court crushed that. Then the next strategy, Governor Evers would veto Republicans' attempts to gerrymander our maps, and then it would go to the courts. And surely the courts would do what they normally do, which is to kind of split the baby and not choose maps that advantage one side over the other. Well, in Wisconsin, after Governor Evers vetoed the Republican maps, then the Republican-dominated right-wing Wisconsin State Supreme Court just decided to choose the Republicans' maps that the governor had vetoed. So no luck there. Most partisan gerrymandered maps in the United States of America. So that left one way out, which in Wisconsin was electing a state Supreme Court majority that would not be in the tank for the GOP. And I say that because it's not like they were gerrymandering maps for Democrats. They were just actually reading the state constitution and considering what the law and constitution required. So they threw out unconstitutional maps that the previous Supreme Court had essentially rubber stamped. And at that point, our state Supreme Court said, "Hey, governor, legislators, if you guys can't agree on maps, we'll choose them." And the Republicans in the legislature uh, suddenly thought, "Oh my God, the Democratic endorsed Supreme Court candidates will gerrymander the state for the left. So we're just going to pass Governor Evers' maps." I have a quote from a Republican legislator at the time who said, "We had a choice between being stabbed, shot, or guillotined. So we decided to be stabbed so we could live to fight another day." Stabbed is his reference to uh, signing into law the governor's proposed 50-50 fair maps in Wisconsin that give both sides an even shot in a state that is 50-50 in the electorate. That's being stabbed for them. But it's like when all you're used to is privilege, equality feels like oppression. That little phrase, little taste of that there. So we now have fair
Well,
maps in our state.
and Wisconsin Republicans have a flair for the dramatic always. Just some of the whiniest, most melodramatic people you'll ever meet or interact with. I mean, I think it's such a great story of hope. I remember when I moved and left, and I was thinking about my former coworkers and interns, and I was like, "Oh God, what are they going to do?" And what's amazing is most of my interns from 2010 are now running things. Former coworkers are holding public office and running for higher office, and it's such an incredible thing, but it's not an overnight, moment. It's a long trajectory. So I really want to emphasize that to folks that you can go to the worst drawn maps in America to where Wisconsin now has a chance to have a trifecta majority in the future. Since we're talking about Wisconsin, I have to ask you about the governor's race. Full disclosure, Dave Crowley is a former coworker, friend. I've donated to his campaign. But I would say in general, 2 weeks ago, I thought of this race as an embarrassment of riches, right? Oh my God, there are so many candidates, all of which could be incredible governors. And then it's sort of devolved into this establishment, right, sort of shit show, excuse my language, which is just sad to me because I think, again, like so many of these candidates are really great. What is your advice to candidates right now and to voters in Wisconsin in particular who are thinking about how to maybe right the ship and get back on track here?
So election day is in 2 weeks. Early vote started today in the Wisconsin governor primary. Here's the thing. We still have an embarrassment of riches. We still have multiple candidates in this race. Any of the Democratic candidates can beat Tom Tiffany, the terrible Republican election denier, Trump toady who's running for governor. And each of them has great plans that would make the state dramatically better. And as like one of the candidates had a kind of implosion, and another candidate uh, came back into the race after suspending a campaign. There's all this twists and turns and drama. But if you take a step way back and you're like, any one of these people could be the next governor, it is a delight. And so my suggestion to people is, one, do not get so mired down in the intra-democratic combat that you say things that you'll regret later, and you get bitter and negative if your person doesn't win. There's lots of different people, and the voters have the ultimate choice on this. And whoever endorses who and all the twists and turns, all this ultimately is who makes the case to the voters that they have the best shot to win and they have the best policies that they'll enact if they do win and be able to lead the state. So one, don't get too out of your out of your happy place along the way. But step two, prepare to endorse and throw everything you can into electing the nominee on August 12th, the day after the primary. And this is true if you're in Michigan as well, or across the country. Like we have primaries, and it's healthy to have debates about what is the best way to do this. How do we go forward? That is what a real, a small d Democratic Party does. And then we have to unite and fight the right to be able to do what's right in the long term. And Wisconsin is still the tipping point state in the Electoral College. We need a governor who's actually going to certify the legitimate presidential election results. And whatever your strain of democracy or however you approach this, we can unite on agreeing that we have to win the general election. So let's do it.
Right. Let's talk about power for a bit, because one thing that I figured out early on in covering the right, that it's less about like awful people and the crazy things they do on the internet, and it's more about the multi-year plan to build power and what they do with it. This is something I think if we could learn one lesson from the right, from Scott Walker, from whatever you want to say, it would be that they understand power in a way that the left doesn't. You talk about this in your book. So, assuming that we are able, talk about how the left can improve its relationship to power.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people get involved in progressive politics because they are concerned about concentrations of power, and totally natural and appropriate. Like concentrated power can be used for terrible ends. But the reality is that we're going to have to exercise power to prevent future attempts to build a tyranny in this country. And that means not just focusing on the thing that gets Democrats involved in politics, which over and over, it's that we want everyone to get healthcare when they're sick. We want people to, be able to lead a good life and have their freedoms and rights protected. All of those things are essential. But we can only do those things if we have a system in which it's possible to pass laws and not have them get struck down by the Supreme Court. It's possible to actually exercise power in service of the public good. So that has been the GOP playbook. They get the genie out of the magic lamp and they wish for more wishes. They get power and then change the laws to give themselves more power at the expense of the public. We need to do the reverse. We need to win power and then uh, unravel their systems of control and return power to the people. So in practice, that means if we win in the states in 26, when we win, we pass the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which I read about in the book, that can end the tyranny of the Electoral College and the swing states and the safe states. Every vote can count the same. When we win in the House and Senate and White House, House, Senate, White House in 28, then we need to abolish the filibuster, expand or add term limits to the U.S. Supreme Court, ban partisan gerrymandering nationwide, do D.C. and Puerto Rico statehood, and maybe go to proportional representation in the U.S. House. A set of reforms that would really transform every part of the federal government and transform how things work at the state level. So many states are just totally failing the test of being legitimate democracies because of gerrymandering in particular, and because of voter suppression. All those things can
What's
change. We, yes.
What is your advice for prodding those folks that we elect? Because I think one of the things that Democrats and the left are so frustrated with right now is that we elect these folks and then they don't wield power, they don't use it, they're thinking about incrementally. So once we elect these folks, how can we gently or aggressively push them to actually wield the power we just gave them?
So the biggest way is actually the work that we do in primaries to, find people who are ready to do this, to ask them to make commitments to do this. This isn't going to be the lead thing that people campaign on. Candidates should be focused on the concerns of voters in their day-to-day lives who've basically given up on the democratic process at this point, who feel like both parties are corrupt. If you're talking about process all the time on the campaign trail, you're probably losing. But we should be clear about what it is that we'll do when we get there. And then the second people are elected, then you go into accountability mode. This is a joke, but I suggest in the book that people get a wrist tattoo with the phone number for the congressional switchboard, so they can look at the phone number on their wrist as they're dialing and reminding their members of Congress to do the things that need to be done. But for anyone who's at a tattoo parlor as you watch this Substack live, it's 202-224-3121. You can call the House, you can call the Senate. Members of Congress do track the calls that come in, and they very rarely get calls about any of this kind of procedural stuff. Most voters totally tune out procedural stuff. But the right
Yeah.
knows that this stuff has enormous consequences. That's why the right pours billions of dollars into getting control of the systems that allow them to write the rules. So we've got to do a little bit of that. We gotta throw ourselves into saying, hey, as soon as you have the power to do it, make these changes. And we came closer than people realize to a national gerrymandering ban before. We were just Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin short of changing uh, the filibuster rules, and now they're both gone. We do not have Democrats running for U.S. Senate who would be unwilling to take action. We just need to make sure that they do it.
I want to ask you, I want to switch tacks a little bit because you are an elections guy, but you also, I think, are one of the folks who understands the importance of culture and media and pop culture. You did, which you write about in the book, my favorite political fundraiser ever, the Princess Bride live reading. But I think beyond elections, how can we better harness culture and media to get our message out and to help build power?
And that's just like I just have a couple minutes left, but I'm very excited
Yep.
about this question.
Oh, we're going
So
to end on time.
I love it. All right, so um, very often Democrats kind of get celebrities to tell people how they should vote, and there's this sort of thought that, oh, everyone's a fan of this or that amazing musical artist or whatever it might be. Let's get that person to endorse a candidate. That doesn't really click with why it is that people love that particular musical artist. My argument is that if you want to, you should ask people to do the thing that they love, that people love them for. We have in Wisconsin, Bon Iver is a Wisconsinite, and he does concerts to get people involved in politics, and he's a musician. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
I
Like
mean,
every
credit
citizen.
credit to Russ Feingold early on for harnessing the power of Bon Iver. That was one of our first victories with Fine Tunes.
So good, right? Russ Feingold, Tammy Baldwin does the same thing. And,
Yeah.
this is the thing for me. So we worked with a lot of actors when I was the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, not to give a political speech, but rather to act, to perform in live script readings of their masterpieces, like The Princess Bride. We had a Veep West Wing crossover event where we had the cast of Veep and the cast of West Wing. We actually had people perform in the characters from the opposite show, which was really funny and really fun to do. Um, Finding and there are local musicians and artists. I think sometimes about Puerto Rico, which has the highest voter turnout in the country. They just don't actually have representation in Congress, that they can't actually cast votes. But part of the reason why they have such incredibly high levels of engagement is that it is a huge party when they have election days. There are DJs, there are musicians playing, there's free food, there's booze, which in Wisconsin is something that has a lot of public support. There's this sense of celebration, civic celebration and fun. And we can do that. We can make politics more like that. This will not work if it's a drag. It will only work if it is something that is actually delightful to be involved in. And so my message for arts and culture is like so many people who work in the arts, who are comedians, all these things, they have serious political views. But what you shouldn't do is ask them to give serious political speeches. You should ask them to do the thing that they're so good at in ways and places that can engage people in then getting involved in elections. And um, I'll I'll land the plane here. Um, the time you kind of see cultural figures get engaged tends to be presidential elections, and that's fine. But in fact, the elections that come down to like literally a single vote tend to be local elections. And so if you're a big celebrity watching this right now, then maybe keep an eye out for like where's there a city council race or a mayoral race or something going on where most voters don't even know what's happening. They have no idea who the candidate is. If you can, do a free concert, do even a live stream for supporters of that person, you can make a gigantic difference in a state legislative race in a state like Wisconsin, where it'll probably come down to a few hundred votes in a couple places that determines the majority in the state legislature. You lending a hand there can be transformative because most people have no idea who's even on the ballot. So if stars lend your star power to this, and organizers think about who's a friend of a friend of a friend who knows Young Gravy, who's a University of Wisconsin grad, and he can get involved. He did a great leading people to the polls event at UW Madison that people did that was awesome. Whoever the person is, um, if you make it fun, then people who are more interested in fun than in eating their broccoli and voting in local elections might wind up voting in a local election. And then side effect, it's also going to turn out to be fun. I recommend very highly enjoying yourself.
I am also a fan of fun. Okay, one more question, and then I'm going to let you go because I will get in so much trouble if I don't ask it. You previously ran for DNC chair. Is that something you would be open to running for again?
I took a crack at it, had a very educational experience. I learned that DNC races are just like local elections, where you don't want to drop in 2 months before the election and try to be like, "Hey, listen to my great ideas." You have to build trust over years. Ken Martin, had a strategy and he executed it and did that. I think my takeaway from all this is that to build the kind of Democratic Party that so many people want, including just about everyone who works at the Democratic Party, a place that is organizing year round and fighting for power at every level, it's going to take thousands and millions of people getting involved from below. This is not actually something that is a light switch you can turn on from the top. And so, this book, this interview, my conversations around the country, like I am encouraging people to roll up their sleeves and get involved where you are, and build the party that you want to see. I am not trying to run for DNC chair again, but I do very much think that in this moment, the Democratic Party is an essential line of not just defense, but channel for going on offense and building a democracy that works for everybody. And if we do that, then if we save democracy, so to speak, or rebuild democracy, then we can end America's meltdown of an economic crisis where people feel like the basic essentials of life are totally beyond reach because of a system in which only the very wealthiest, most powerful people get to write the rules for all of us. It's going to take a lot of people at every level, and the party can be one vehicle for that work.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for making the time today. I know you've been so busy on your book tour. I encourage all of my readers. The book is here. This is the plan. Thank you. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.